It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Howdy-ho, hey. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? Thank you for joining us. Nice to have you here. Dr. John Fuller is here today. And Dr. Fuller is a man who has done many things in his life. He's a retired U.S. Army major. He was also a Marine during the Vietnam era. Currently, he works as the Chief Engagement Educator at the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the VA as we more commonly know it as. He's written a book called America's Diversity Meltdown, and he's also currently touring the United States giving lectures on the failures of diversity training and how through his program of engagement and dialogue is the only solution to improving race relations in this country. So he will be up in just a few minutes. Before we get to Dr. Fuller, we have a song that I'm really excited about. Her name is Sarah P., and she is a singer-songwriter, 25 years old, from Long Island, New York, which anybody in music knows that there have been so many great singer-songwriters to come from Long Island, and she's another one. She's got a great song. It's a very catchy tune, got stuck in my head, and I'm excited to play it. You can go to soundcloud.com/Sarah Proch, SARAPROCH, and check her out. There's more music there as well. So, this is Sarah P. and If I Wait.
And if I wait for you to say, this is what you want, baby, I'd be waiting on forever, but I don't have the time. Spent it all on you, and what you still can't say. And if I wait, the weather's getting cold, and this ain't what I want. But lately I've been feeling warmer here when I'm alone. 'Cause I ain't got the time. Spent it all on you, and what you still can't say. Each night I'ma sleep a little better, and each day I'll be a little more together. And you and your ego will be alright. It won't keep you awake. I won't be lonely 'cause I'm keeping all the loving that I gave. I'm giving it back to me 'cause I need it more. And I'm sending all of your well wishes out the door. You've done me in this time, and I just can't wait. No, I just can't wait. Yeah, I know I'll be waiting on what ain't gonna come, 'cause it's impossible to give you everything that you want. Yeah, I know it's not the first time that I said I was done, but it's the first time that I'm taking back the loving that I gave. For you to say, this is what you want, baby, I'd be waiting on forever, and I don't have the time. Spent it all on you, and what you still can't say. Each night I'ma sleep a little better, and each day I'll be a little more together. And you and your ego will be alright. It won't keep you awake. I won't be lonely 'cause I'm keeping all the loving that I gave. And if I wait, and if I wait, and if I wait, I won't be lonely 'cause I'm keeping all the loving that I.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Okay, please welcome my guest, Dr. John Fuller. Hello, John. How are you?
Good, Doc. How you doing?
Good, very good. Your bio is amazing. There's so much stuff here. You have done an awful lot of stuff. I could tell right away that you were an ex-military guy with all the acronyms on here. But you were a retired Army major, and you were also in the Marine Corps during Vietnam.
Right.
Thank you for serving our country. I always appreciate people who serve the country. When you were in Vietnam, were you actually in action?
I saw action, yeah. 11th Marines.
Well, what years were you there?
In 71. I was after a lot of the heavier fighting in Da Nang and that in 68, but I graduated high school in 70, so I couldn't get there any earlier.
Now, were you drafted or did you volunteer?
I volunteered.
Oh, very good. Wow, very commendable. So now, years and years later, you are currently working as the Chief Employee Engagement Educator with the Department of Veterans Affairs. What is a Chief Employee Engagement Educator?
Yeah, they recognize that engagement is just a critical factor. Both Fortune 500 and federal government realize that, because if employees aren't engaged, then they're just sleepwalking throughout the day. So we basically in the federal government in total have about 30% of the people that are what we call fully engaged. So there's, my purpose is to go out and develop programs such as the World Cafe on Race Relations dialogue that I've been doing for the past several months, and engage people, have them work on solutions and dialogue and come to action type of planning versus just having a lecture thrown at them. So an engagement person, I'm the chief of that, and I really am the only one doing this right now. So it's amazing with 360,000 people in the VA, but we're trying to develop engagement champions throughout the country. So that it is working. It's going to take, I believe, the new leadership of Secretary Shulkin to fully stand behind this, and I know that he does. So I think it'll work out fine.
Now, when you say engagement, you're talking about people that are actually going to do something versus just being there, going through the motions? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you're actively engaged, you're not only doing that. I mean, it's okay for a person to come in and do their job as good as they possibly can, but we want people also to become actively engaged and maybe looking for ways to do things better, and taking away the cloak of not feeling they can do that for a lack of what we call psychological safety, for fear of retaliation. That's what hurt the VA before, is because people wouldn't bring up problems or solutions to things, and that ended up creating secret patient waiting lists and all those problems that the VA has suffered throughout the last decade. And it was just revealed just a few years ago. So we want people to be able to do that and not feel like they're going to be retaliated. It's not going to stop it, because human nature is going to retaliate against people, but we're going to try to weed out. The secretary just said today that people are going to get fired. I mean, it's just, we cannot allow veterans not to be served, and to the best of their ability. If you don't want to do it here, then take your skills and go someplace else. Because I guarantee you, a lot of people that are working now throughout the country, if they would have committed the same types of dereliction of duty and that, they've been fired the next day. But because of merit system protection laws and those type of things that have just placed a burden on getting rid of the worst, people are still here. hopefully that will be able to change. Maybe some congressional action can have that change.
So it's the idea that people have gotten their jobs through whatever kind of affirmative action, perhaps, who were maybe not the most qualified person for that job, but are somehow protected. They're in a protected class.
Well, they're protected not only by the merit system protection principles that there is throughout the federal government, but over 80% of the people that are moved ahead in the federal government are internal. So you cannot tell me that there's not more well-qualified people on the outside, and affirmative action does have things to do with it. I will say the federal government does not really do affirmative action. They're exempt from that. They do a management directive 715, but that's basically just showing percentages and maybe barriers to certain groups. And right now, the group that is suffering the most, and people would be very surprised at that, is white males. But they don't want to address that because they say, well, we still got to keep the other groups ahead because they're historically underrepresented. And I've pushed back on that. I'm saying, well, I think that's what you all were working for, to bring those percentages up to a reflection of society. In my book, I don't even recommend having special interest groups or affirmative action or anything like that. I want to hire the best of the best. And yet the government still feels like if there's some barrier out there, then people must be discriminated. And that's not the case. There are just bad managers. There's bad employees. For the most part, the VA employees are excellent employees. And I've spoken to thousands of them across the country. I've been in every state and facility and VA hospitals across the country. And these people are dedicated, but they're working a lot of times for people that should not be managing, and also for employees that should not even be coming to work. So, we have a lot of struggle with that, and all federal agencies do, for that matter. And I think that that's why President Trump is coming in and trying to revamp this. And he's already had transition teams, even in the VA, that's come in and see how we can do things more effectively with less people. We'll give you the resources to do it. I mean, he's a business person, so that's how he's done it to make his money, and other people do too. So let's try to look at it in that capacity and keep the best of the best. Johns Hopkins Hospital is not number one or not number two every year because they just hire whoever shows up. I mean, they didn't get Dr. Ben Carson because he wasn't the best. They got him because he was the best, years ago. And I met Dr. Carson when I was the director there at Johns Hopkins before. And he is the best of the best. So that's what we want. I want our veterans to be treated by the best of the best. And that's why I'm challenging even such things as diversity education, because throughout my career in diversity, which has been 26 years now, both in the military and on the outside, they never discussed race relations ever. And it's always been the accusing the white males of everything. I mean, it's just amazing how that type of diversity education was allowed to continue, but not so much because people weren't even sure what to present. So they would go out and get somebody that says, yes, I'm a diversity educator. So they just let them do it to click the block. And for the whole time, you'd have a whole classroom where you'd have the white elephant in the room, and nobody wanted to talk about race at all. So I changed that this last year. I went out to St. Louis, talked to people that were living in Ferguson, created a race relations dialogue that works. It's the very first race relations dialogue in the federal government. Why did it take a 65-year-old white male to develop it? And former retired military, I don't know. But somebody had to do it, so I'm doing it.
First of all, I think it's ridiculous to assume that anybody can be teaching diversity without speaking about race. Because if you're talking, I assume we're talking about ethnic diversity.
Yes.
Okay. So if we're talking, if the conversation is about ethnic diversity, the whole foundation of the conversation is about race. So the idea that the idea that you would omit race from that conversation is ludicrous.
Right, and it should be, but it isn't. And what the crux of the education is that educators will come in and they'll say, diversity is good for you. It's the right thing to do. And let's get our percentages up. And, and we need to teach managers how to manage diversity, which is meaning they're targeting white managers of saying, well, now you need to know how to manage these other races. And that's just wasn't right. Because when the curriculum was first developed back in the 80s, they excluded white males from even being a part of that. And that's in my book as well. They just excluded them. So 35 to 40% of the American population didn't have a voice into this from the very beginning. So it was doomed to fail. Dr. King before, when he had race relations dialogues, that was going along well. And hopefully it would have continued. But after his assassination, it went underground. People became victimized and all those things started to just roll into a quagmire that people actually had to come out. And I had a Harvard professor told me one time, he says, well, John, I see in your curriculum, you're not making white males feel terrible. And I said, why would I want to do that? I said, I want people to feel good about working with any background or race. And let's get down and talking about the business here. So even in Harvard and universities and all of that, they wanted you to go out and actually tell people everybody had white privilege, which they don't, and everybody's a racist or have unconscious bias. Those are the new buzzwords now that are coming out, unconscious bias. And it's only basically white males that can have it because we don't know what it is to be discriminated against. And that's such BS that, I'm pushing back, and I'm glad the secretary is behind me on this because it's time that we got really straight talk on race relations. And most people that I've found, the hundreds and hundreds that I've had so far in these sessions, they do want to talk and they're respectful. There's nobody that's ever acted out on this at all. But you'd have to have it away from like a town hall setting. If you have a town hall setting just like we see today, when congressmen are standing in front of people, they just try to shout them down. And people can't even talk or answer a question. That's not the way you have a dialogue. Those people are idiots for doing that. Yes, they can protest, but that's all they're doing. They're not even trying to work for a solution.
You know who Milo is?
Yes, I do.
And all that happened at Berkeley. To me, that was just ridiculous because it's the agenda of the left, it seems to be, that it's all right to have free speech as long as we agree with what you're speaking about.
Yeah, that's not free speech. That's
not free
speech.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So there wasn't a big enough safe space out at Berkeley for people to get into to keep Milo from coming. Yeah, he's a shock jock type of speaker, much like Imus and other people have been in the past. People kind of, if you don't like what he says, then don't go to it. It's like nobody's pushing people in an auditorium saying you have to listen to Milo and his talk.
Right.
So, yeah, a university was always a place in the past when I grew up in the 60s and that was a place where you could go to and have free speech, at least, but then it started to, just go downhill and people, you can't say that, you hurt my feelings. So we're getting a bunch of people into the system now, workers and that they just really don't know what it is to have real free speech, which means listening to understand. The biggest thing about coming in and even having a debate with somebody is listening to the other side, kind of like the old Crossfire, Hannity and Combs, or whoever, they talked with respect. And that's what you have to do now. We're well beyond just going out with signs and protesting. It just has to be more than that.
Well, one of the failures, I believe, of the Obama administration was that race relations, I think he was very deceptive with people. I think when his speech in 2008 at his inauguration was this message of hope that, quite honestly, I believed when he gave that great, eloquent speech. And as we've seen now, 8 years later, race relations in America are far worse, in my opinion, than they were when I was growing up as a kid in the 70s. People are more fearful, and he was supposed to be the savior. I'm speaking kind of theoretically here, but
right, sure. Mm-hmm.
He was okay here, and I think particularly from white people's perspective, that we have overcome this thing now. We have elected an African American man as the first one for president of the United States. So this is a step up. This is a step forward in our race relations, where in fact just the opposite happened. the opposite result. And I'm wondering why. I'm still sort of baffled by why. Do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I really do. And I think it's because we never really continued that dialogue about actual race relations. When I do a session with people now, I put up a slide that lists about 100 different things that fall into the race relations, everything from police relations to the experience of all races, including white. It's just going down the line. It just comes in real slow, and people are looking at that and I say, it's this caldera that's remained under the surface. People aren't worried about the top of the volcano. Seismologists are worried about the stuff that's underneath. And because we have not continued a conversation for decades, those things just stayed there. And right now, most polls show about 70% of American population feel that we have a race relations problem. That doesn't mean that people think that everybody's racist or that. Some people do. But most of it is just because, what are we doing to correct this? And every session that I've had from Detroit and St. Louis and Columbia, South Carolina, and others, they're saying we really had wanted to talk, but we didn't know how to start. And these are all coming from seasoned adults that lived and worked with each other sometimes for 20 years. And they never talked about it because they were scared. And I think that is a major reason. Obama was an absolute failure and a disappointment as far as race relations is concerned. He never really tried. And it was always playing, every time he came on, it was always the blame game, right, versus let's try to work together on a solution here. Calling everything from the police stupid to this and that, and jumping on, sending Eric Holder into Ferguson, and all of those things that were there, jumping on every situation, made it look like some civil rights issue when most of them weren't. No. And that was that type of thing, and it just permeated in people's heads. And I think that this last election here, people had enough, and they were saying, wait a second. Not only are they doing that, but I got the other candidate calling me a basket of deplorable and this and that. And right now, I think the people that are on the left side, the very progressive left, thinks everybody is a deplorable. So, I mean, it's really ramped itself up, and we need to do something about it very quickly, because this stuff isn't going away. Everybody says, well, just let it do its course and it'll eventually kind of fade. I don't think so. I really don't. And we keep pushing the same diversity education out there. It's good for you. These corporate people, it's the right thing to do. And we have a long way to go. We got political people from the cast of Hamilton out lecturing to the, soon-to-be vice president. They're using these bully pulpits without any chance for the other person to respond. That's not a protest. That is something that is just, you're just being sanctimonious in your utterings. And then, okay, I said my piece, now I can walk away. But are you offering any solution to this?
Well, they don't. That's the whole thing. They never offer any solution. All they want to see is equal outcome. Mm-hmm. They don't care about the process to get there. All they're seeing is, I saw an article on Yahoo today, and it was talking about Trump's press conferences. And it was a picture of the press corps, and Sean Spicer was up on the stage. And the caption said, "Where is the diversity?"
Right.
Because the picture was largely of white males who were sitting in the audience. And in the mind of the progressive left, all they see is a bunch of white males. They don't see anything else. This is how ridiculous they've gotten. There's a term in Britain that they call the regressive left, which I actually like, because that's exactly what's happened to the left. They've gone so far to the left, they've come around to the other side, where now they are really more of the racists than the people that they're calling out as racist. Because all they're looking at in that picture, it's just a bunch of white guys.
Yeah, and everything is like that now. It seems that even on the music and the film awards and all of that, we need more diversity in that. Well, if people want to go see the movies, then maybe they might win, regardless of what race that you are. So, I mean, all of that is just in your face. And that's what people don't like. They don't want it in their face. One of the young ladies on, I think it was even Fox News today that represents the left, she's saying, well, I've never seen anything like this in protest. She wasn't in during a Vietnam War protest. I can tell you that. So, I mean, it hasn't got to that point yet, but it's just enough people that it's in your face all the time. And pretty soon I see, people like that's members of the Tea Party and that they're going to come out themselves, in a very peaceful type protest. And they're going to really show, look, Donald Trump won the election. You can sit there and cry and stammer and insult. I mean, I'm on Twitter a lot because, my publicist said go to Twitter and Facebook and all that. I've had people issue me death threats because I actually supported the president on some of the things he's doing, like not releasing terrorists and all these other things. And this, it's like, you should die. And, it looks like you're going to die anyway. So why don't you just die now? I mean, they just call you everything. So
it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. Yeah. Do you know who Jesse Lee Peterson is?
I have heard of the name, but no.
Next time you Google his name, because he is a black reverend, very conservative, who basically is saying a lot of the same stuff that we're saying. And
that's right. I just Googled him now. And I know who he is. Yeah. I just can place the name right off the bat.
And he has been threatened more times by people, and he's primarily threatened by black people. Those are the ones that are threatening him. White people aren't really threatening him. It's a funny kind of a double standard, because the liberal left would never threaten him because he's black, and they don't want to appeared to be racist. If he was white, he would be getting death threats all over the place from the social justice warriors. But because he's black, they don't bother him. The conservative whites like him, so they're not going to threaten him. The ones he's getting threats from are other blacks.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, I'm not sure if you know Mason Weaver or not. He's been on Fox a lot, and same thing, as an African-American man, and he's very outspoken and just the same thing. And he's told me that he gets the same thing happening to him, from members of his own family, of all things. So, you're a traitor, you're all this. And, as a white male, I'm a conservative, and I'm such an anomaly in this business. That's one of the major things out there. If you look at any person that does equal opportunity investigations or diversity training, whether it's Fortune 500 or the federal government, there's well over 95% of people who do this are minorities and women. There's less than 5% that are white males. I'm the only one in the VA. 160,000 people. I'm the only white male that does this. So it's got to tell you something of where the voice was.
Well, do you suppose that was a intentional design, that people wouldn't take you seriously as a white male talking about diversity?
Yeah, well, it was from the very beginning, because they said that, well, you can't understand the minority experience. You've never been discriminated against, so how you won't have any credibility standing up. Well, I broke that mold, because I was senior advisor to the DoD Equal Opportunity Institute, director of Johns Hopkins, and now the chief educator for the VA. So you have to do that. If people didn't stand their ground, people didn't want me to do this World Cafe on race relations either, because they said, well, I don't know if you can handle all the minority people that's going to stand up and scream and yell. And I said, first of all, they're not going to do that. And I said, I'll be able to treat everyone with respect and all that. So then after the first several sessions, and they got all these after action reports and extensive written evaluations to our participants, everybody quieted now. And now everybody's saying, oh yeah, I supported this from the very beginning. It's just something, but I enjoy that look when they're doing that.
Let's take an example. So we're going to start a dialogue on race relations. How do you, first of all, you would have to take each race individually, wouldn't you? And pinpoint specific problems that those particular people would be having in society? Or would you take them as a collective group?
You do it as a collective group because you want it to be all about us versus them. And one thing you don't do is, I do it, if you look at the World Cafe concept, everybody comes in, you're sitting at tables of 4 or 5, just like you're sitting at a cafe table. So you're having that intimate type of discussion with each other at tables spread across an auditorium. And then you have 3 separate questions of 20 minutes each. After each question, then everybody from the tables, except for one, moves to a completely different table. And not as a group, but they have to go sit at a completely different one, so you can have cross-pollination of ideas. You take the very first question, and it's not going to be, well, what do you think about white privilege, or what do you think about police brutality? I ask the first question is, why do we need a national conversation on race? Why even have it? Everybody said it for years. Why do we need it? So they take that question and then they discuss it amongst themselves, amongst the races, and they'll come up and they'll report out afterwards, all right, about this is what we discussed. And what you're going to find, there's some commonalities at the tables, but you're going to have a whole myriad of things that people come up with. And people are listening to other people as they're even reporting out. The second question I asked recently in Columbia, South Carolina, was what is the effect of media on race relations? Do you think it helps, hurts? And what about fake news? How does that contribute? So you take a topic, this generalized topic, and then people will take that. And yeah, they'll talk about maybe such things as white privilege or Black Lives Matter, but you don't come in and ask the really explosive question right off the bat. Because if you do that, now you're at such a high intensity level, there's nowhere else to go. So you start off low, and I facilitated throughout the 20 minutes and allow people to talk, and they do. I mean, every race will talk together. It's just such a beautiful thing. I've never seen anything like it in my life. So it really works. Hewlett-Packard uses it, JetBlue, a lot of other corporations use it too, for everything from product development or what have you. But in race relations, no, you don't want to target a specific race. You want to have people look at things collectively so that they can work in collaboration to come up with some solutions. What can we do about this? What are some things? And I asked them, what do you recommend are the top 3 race relations issues that you feel that dialogue can create an action plan and maybe some recommendations on how to handle it? So people are so interested in this that it's just amazing that they will talk. Their written evaluations say, I've never been in more of a respectful atmosphere in my life. It's like those type of comments are just hundreds of them. I mean, this should be going on throughout the federal government so people can talk. No more town halls. There's only going to be a few people that actually stand up in a town hall anyway. And so everybody else that wants to talk are just sitting there. And you see that now with even people that are coming in and shouting racist remarks and things in these town halls. The majority of the people that are at these things, they're just sitting there wondering, like, what the heck is going on? So they're not really talking with each other. They're just listening to rants. But race relations is something you start off slow because we've got to have a starting point. We can't jump into the end of the line and say, okay, what about all of these type of things? Well, let it come up naturally.
Well, okay, I see your point, and I think that that's valid. You've got to start at a common place. Otherwise, people are going to kill each other. You do have to get to the end at some point.
Yeah, and it probably won't be in my lifetime. Okay. But there's just so many issues, Douglas, that it's not going to be something that's solved now. But if the dialogue continues, and that's one thing I do for every VA medical facility and regional office that I go to, I will have a facilitator in training that I personally have selected from that facility that's going to carry on these conversations once a quarter. So every 3 months, people are going to know. And they have waiting lists now at these facilities that I went to a year ago that want to actually be a part of this now. So it's that type of thing that we want to see. People are interested in making it. We cannot continue the way we are now at 50% of our population one way and 50 at the other, because it's just not going to work. So let's get together. We have a lot of commonalities. And what you find is that people will say, you know what? I didn't realize you had that experience. Or, as a white male, I didn't realize that you were actually thinking that you wanted to be a part of this. And it's something to see people from other races just have that openness about them that they wouldn't otherwise have said, not given that particular hospitable environment. Not hostile environment, but hospitable. And that's one of the key elements of the World Cafe process, is that you create that atmosphere. You have a room large enough to handle 30 to 50 people, but they're able to look outside of a window too and see maybe trees or whatever. So you're taking away a lot of the stressors that people feel in a normal type of setting that would be discussing race. Most people, including the 5 people from Ferguson that I had in my class, said they had never talked about race before with members of the other races in their life. So, you wonder why those things happen in places like Ferguson and Philadelphia and the other ones in Milwaukee. But I can see why it happens because no one talked. No one, and it's not just talk; it's dialogue. You're trying to come up with solutions together.
One of the problems that I've always felt with this concept of diversity, now that wasn't a word people used in the 70s. We didn't get that. I don't know when that word started to pop up in our culture. It sounds like one of those, what I like to call the ponytail liberals from the Ivy League schools. It just sounds like one of those kind of phrases that they, you know what I mean? The permanent college student type who, spend their entire life being a college student isolated in the Ivy walls and have no concept of what the real world is like. And it just sounds like one of those phrases. The problem with it is that celebrating diversity is completely counterproductive to actually getting people together. Because what you're doing is you're pointing out people's differences as the number one important thing that we should be concerned with. I've always suggested that we should celebrate similarities versus celebrate diversity, because diversity is obvious. We know who's black, who's white, who's Asian. What we don't know is what bonds us as an American. And this is one question that I like to ask people like you and other people I've had on the show. It's a hypothetical. If I were to ask you what makes America a great country, would you be able to give me one answer, that most Americans would agree upon?
No. Because of our complete differences of opinion. America was always a melting pot, but now diversity classes and all of that say, well, we're just a fruit bowl. So, or a salad or whatever, mixtures and, all this crap. So, our country was great and fused together because we brought in people from Ireland and other European nations and whatever nation that came in. But they came in and became citizens right away. My wife's Italian and her grandparents came over in Ellis Island. And they wouldn't have got off that boat unless they had a sponsor and a job waiting for them and they were in good health. So those type of things stopped. And we don't have a true diversity. I mean, the word itself is just so misused because people say, well, diversity means diversity of thought. You know what it means to most white males that I've encountered? Race. And there's nothing that they can say at the start of any presentation that's not going to say that, because there isn't one definition of it. I'm only doing this because I'm challenging diversity. And that's my website, challengingdiversity.com, is because I'm challenging it to the point where we have broken down into communities of color. If that's not a separation type of thing, or the identities, like you just said, is that once you do that, now it's us versus them versus all about us, or all of us being Americans. Because if you continue saying, well, the black community, the Hispanic community, the immigrant community now, I mean, all of those things together, you're just separating. And people say, well, we love our diversity. Really? Because all you're doing is separating by identities and communities of color and all of this. So we have to not have that. And those are chapters in my book as well, is that those things really should not exist.
I agree.
Because, I mean, I don't live in a white community. I mean, it's like, and even if I did, so what? I don't look at it that way. It's not something that, is that always going to be that way for these group of people? To me, that's just being short-sighted.
The answer to the question that I just posed to you, that I came up with, as one that would be possibly agreeable to most Americans, if you were to ask the question again, what makes America a great country? The concept of individual liberty and personal freedom. I would suggest that most people would agree with that. Their definition of what that is might be different.
I think that's a very good definition, actually. I would hope, and patriots like myself, that serve the country, would certainly agree with that. I see a lot of people that no matter what you would say, it's that I think people actually hate this country from what I see on the outside, but Yeah, I think that most, if you're saying the word most, that's something that people could live with. If you can get people together and talk about it.
I think that a lot of the people who immigrated here came here for that reason, because where they lived before, they didn't have that privilege. They didn't have that right. And
yeah, if they went through the true immigration process, of course.
No, I don't mean the ones that jump the wall. I mean like the ones that, the ones that come to mind are the Asians, the Chinese who came here, the Koreans who came here, who started a business, who didn't ask for anything but an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And those people, as a demographic, are the most successful immigrants we've got in this country. And, well, you know the whole story about the SAT scores, and now the Asians are outperforming the whites. They beat us at our own game, and bully for them. I think that's fantastic. I think absolutely
so too.
Fantastic.
Yeah, their work ethic, their school ethics. I mean, so now they're not even considered a minority in California. So it's like, well, wait a second, we're not going to give you that status anymore because you're too good. It's like there's something wrong with that system.
Well, so then some liberal at Berkeley will come up with an idea of Korean privilege and Asian privilege, and they'll have all of these other ones, and they'll just lump them over with the white people, and it's just it'll go on and on. They got to have something to do for the rest of their life over there. Assuming that we can get to some point, and it sounds like you have, how do you integrate this idea into society? I know you can do it. You can take your presentation into a corporation. You could take your presentation into a government facility. How do you get it to where it impacts the people of Ferguson, or it impacts the people of Baltimore, or people who have seen a complete disintegration of their society?
By including community members and groups into it, like we did in Detroit. I brought in the Wayne State University students and the faculty members there, and we had an interagency / community session with them. It went extremely well, just like the other ones. People were able to talk, from young people to baby boomers. I mean, it was just a fantastic type of group setting that people were together. They're the ones that's going to take this knowledge and dialogue type of skills and bring it back to the community and say, look, we need to do this more. In fact, Wayne State University in Detroit is going to open this up and have World Cafes throughout their campus. So that type of thing can permeate throughout the community. The types of things that they did in Charleston when the murders occurred there in the Black church, they had dialogue sessions, and then they had the types of dialogues that people actually got together, because those type of tragic things transcended race. And once we get to the point where we transcend it with these dialogues, and I think that that's happening, and I see elements of that all the time, we're going to get better at it. We're going to get the community involved and have these type of discussions as if they were just a normal conversation. And have that be the order of the day versus the other side of, people just screaming it's your fault and the other one saying it's not my fault, and, all those things going back. Us versus them has always permeated throughout the decades that I've been involved in this business, and it's going to continue for quite a while until we get people together.
I think the other problem with diversity in the way that it's portrayed these days from the left is that the way people made it in America, if you will, was through assimilation. And diversity kind of goes against that concept of assimilation. It's very difficult for people to all get together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya when everybody is screaming, I have my rights, and I have my ethnic identity, and I have my national origin. The whole point of when people came to America was that we all became Americans. Now, defining exactly what American culture is difficult. That's very difficult. America is a work in progress. We're a new country. It's easy to say, what is Japanese culture? What is Chinese culture? What is Swedish culture? English culture? Okay, that's much easier to define. American culture is not. And it's been defining itself as the immigrants have come. So I do believe that this experiment can work, but like you said, it has to be done in a way that we're not denying the white elephant in the room, that we're not putting blame on people, that we're not spouting off these wonderful click phrases like white privilege and institutional racism. I would argue that institutional racism existed 60 years ago. I don't think it exists now.
I agree. I agree with that. You know, I feel like the American values, as you just said earlier, it's always evolving. When we had different immigrant groups that came, whether it was the Irish or German factions or other ones, I mean, yeah, you bring in those rich cultures there, but they do assimilate and learn the language, and people did that in the past, and they became Americans. I mean, my
Right.
wife said that when she grew up, she was told, "You're not learning Italian," so they didn't. They just spoke only English. She doesn't know any Italian. I mean, it only took them a generation away to do that.
I was just going to say that I grew up with a family like that. The parents were from the old country. They were from Italy. And the kids who were my age, who were my friends, when we went to their house, the parents would speak to him in Italian and he would answer back in English. And they didn't understand what he was talking about.
I know. I asked my wife one time when I first met her, and there was something, I don't know, we went to a restaurant, there was an Italian restaurant, and I said, "Well, what does this mean?" She said, "I have no idea."
I think he did it just to piss them off.
It was an Italian word. And she says, "I never learned Italian." I said, "Well, what language do you know?" And she says, "French." I took that in high school. So it's really, I think our American values are under siege. And it's because of what you just said. Everybody clings onto their specific identity and ethnicity and status or whatever that they are. They're all associated with America, but they've never really just said, "I am an American." Everybody has hyphenated type of things to them. I'm African American. I'm Hispanic American. I wrote that we should do away with hyphens. That's what Theodore Roosevelt said. There's no place in America for hyphenated Americans, because we're all Americans. Bring your culture, bring your heritage, bring all of that with you, and infuse some of those values that you have into America. That's what makes us a greater country,
right?
Is because we're giving you that liberty, as you spoke about earlier, and the freedom to do that. And that will only make us better. But if you hold on and say, "Well, you need to treat me as still a German or a French or whatever," then that's not going to work. Because this is not France, this is not Mexico, this is not, other countries. So until we get to that point again, that we're all Americans, work towards that, and still bring in the values. I have no problems with anybody from any race that comes through legally or to the process. Bring it with you, because we've learned a lot and evolved over the centuries. But we are a young country. We're not the ancient thousands of years old, like you said, in Japan and China and the rest of them. So it's completely different.
Well, and also that's what makes us a rich social tapestry, by having all of those different threads weaved together or woven together to create our country. You go to New York City and you've got the best food in the world from every place, every corner of the world, right there. And everybody who's cooking it is authentic. It's wonderful. I think that's fabulous. I think that's what the model of America should be. It's okay for the photo op if you want to have one of every, like the Noah's Ark, and say this is what America looks like. That's fine. But unfortunately, the Clinton, photo op where I always got a kick out of that, when every time she gave a speech and there were two Muslim women and a gay couple holding hands and two black guys and, behind her. And it was done intentionally. To do it like that with no substance when the country is having all kinds of race issues is like plastic flowers put up in front of a funeral parlor. They look great, but they're going to melt in the sun and they don't smell and they're dead. And that's all you've got if you're just putting people's pictures up because of the color of their skin and that they don't want to be in the same room with each other.
Yeah, it was staged. Absolutely. You could tell that. And, that was pre-programmed. I don't know how many rooms and conferences that I've went to in the VA and other places where somebody will come in and usually on the senior ranks, there's more white males that are in it because they've just accomplished that throughout their life, and now they're kind of like these senior people in government and that. But women are making great strides, and everybody else is. But there's always somebody that, we need more diversity in this room. Well, you know what that means to the white person in the room? Well, you must mean more of you and less of me.
Right.
Because, and that's really a resistance type of mode that people get into, because it's like you're basically slapping me in the face for being white and having an accomplishment. So it has to get away from that. We've got to get away from using that word actually at all, you know. Right.
It's fundamentally racist. That's exactly what it is. And yet they're the ones that scream at everyone else calling them racist. But in fact, it's just come around the other way.
Yeah. The pendulum has definitely swung.
The pendulum
I've seen
has
that over
definitely
my
swung.
career.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, this concept of equal opportunity versus equal outcome. It is impossible or nearly impossible to ever achieve equal outcome when you're dealing with human beings. You can do that with automobiles coming off an assembly line because you've got equal, identical components going into every model. With people, you can't do that. You know, there is a misconception in our Declaration of Independence saying that all men are created equal. I don't agree with that. I know what they meant. I believe they meant all men should have equal opportunity. But to say blatantly all men are created equal, I don't believe that. Because, first of all, science has proven that not to be true by DNA analysis. And second of all, people are born with different skill sets. There are people who have a great knack for music and art that they're just born with. They don't know where it came from. There are people who have great athletic ability that can run faster than anyone else. People have different skill sets. People will have different desires and dreams. And people will succeed or fail based on their own merit. And to expect equal outcome for all peoples is ridiculous. You might as well get rid of the Olympic Games, because the Olympic Games, to me, are the exact model of equal opportunity. Everybody competing from all over the world, but in the end, only one person gets the gold medal. In this sort of idealistic utopia that the left is trying to create, everybody would run, everybody would compete, and in the end, everybody gets a gold medal.
Yeah, well, that's why kids get trophies all the time. I know I was a soccer coach and I had to do it, even though I didn't particularly want to do it, but it was something that was kind of forced upon you. I think that, you know, looking back at when President Kennedy uttered the words affirmative action, he said that we needed to take affirmative actions to ensure equal opportunity. Now, the way I look at it is that opportunity is not a guarantee for anything. It's just giving you the opportunity to try and have what's also the pursuit of happiness. No one said it was guaranteed happiness. Right. It just says you have the equal opportunity for the pursuit of happiness. Basically, in my mind, that's what the founders were looking at. No, we're not created equal. Everybody has different intellectual capabilities and all of that. They developed that, and I couldn't fix a car for the life of me right now, but my son and everybody else can. So, but I can go out and do what I do. So you just really, you have the opportunity to do what's best for you. No one should hold you back because of the color of your skin or your ethnicity or whatever. And when I was an EEO investigator, equal opportunity investigator, what you find is that almost all equal opportunity investigators are minorities, and therefore you're not going to get even equal outcomes on that, because there's a lot of their own biases that exist. And that, yeah, I agree that this happened to you when the most complaints, there's only 2 to 3% of the 100,000 plus that they get at the EEOC are ever founded. See, people don't report that because there's a lot of fake complaints that come in, people trying to get back at people. But people will just take the case and waste $60,000, which is what it is to process one of these complaints, basically to say, well, there's nothing there. So equal opportunity to me is just having the opportunity for the pursuit of happiness. You know, I've had that said to me before about the equal opportunity. You know, just because I have the opportunity to take a hike through the Shenandoahs, which I do, doesn't mean I'm going to do the longest hike. You know, and I may take the shortest one. But I have the opportunity to do it if I want to, and I can train for it and maybe try to do it. But, that's my pursuit of happiness, is doing a 3 mile versus 15 mile.
I think that everybody who has come to this country who has worked hard can achieve a level of success. I think that's what we can provide for people, that in other countries they would have less of an opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely they would. And even in our country, just taking myself as an example, I grew up dirt poor. I had an outside toilet until I was a junior in high school, living along a river in a shack. Nobody gave me anything. I got my stuff just going through the military and taking a GI Bill and then worked all the way up to doctorate. But that was only because I took what was there. I had the equal opportunity like everybody else to get the GI Bill, and I took it and did something with it. So, you can do this if you put your nose to the grindstone. And just like the Asian countries that immigrate here, they're bringing a work ethic that is just unparalleled. So it's something that, that's why they're successful. And that's why a lot of American workers were successful in the past, because their work ethic was the same. And a lot of them still are, if they have the opportunity to have their factories come back.
Well, that's very true. We have moved a lot of jobs out, and that was one of Trump's big platforms, that he's going to bring jobs back. Maybe he will. I hope he does. I think people have the desire to work. They should have a right to work. They should have a job that is available to them.
Right.
If there's no jobs, you're going to have anarchy, or you're going to have the big boss of the government coming and just giving everybody a check and people sit around. Certainly socialism doesn't work. It hasn't worked in any application on this planet in its purest forms. It has worked in limited capacities. It's a great fantasy.
Yeah, and then also it depends
work.
on the culture of the country, too. It never worked in the Soviet Union because of the authoritarian type of thing they had. It may work in places more like Sweden, or, well, maybe not Sweden anymore, but, those countries that didn't have that type of an iron fist for a government. So it could work in some limited capacity, like you said, but I prefer our republic that we have now.
Oh, absolutely. It would destroy the fabric of this country to do anything more than giving people opportunity and freedom. Because then we're just going to have to rewrite the Constitution. We're going to start over. And usually when that happens, a coup happens, a bloody war happens, people die, it's a real mess. And I don't think we want to go through that again, because we did it in the 1860s, and I don't think we want to do it now with nuclear weapons. Certainly. What is your book called again?
It's America's Diversity Meltdown, and it's challenging diversity education and its epic failure to improve race relations.
Okay. And it's available on Amazon and all those places?
Yeah, Amazon and that, and they can go to my website, challengingdiversity.com, and order it from there too. But yeah, it's a good read, and really just from an insider's point of view, been in the business 26 years now, both in the military, corporate, and federal arenas. So, and it's all the same. So, I've tried to change it, and I'm changing it now. So it's finally gotten a position. I worked hard to get to my level in the federal government after retiring from the military. So now I'm in a position, I've got a full secretary behind me of the second largest agency in the country. So let's see what we can do to improve relations, because that's what I want to do.
I think that's very admirable, and I think people should go out and get your book. I think the tide is turning back. People have realized that this progressive left rant has failed, and it has left the majority of Americans in disbelief as to what's happened in this country. It almost makes me want to cry, because I love my country. I think it's the greatest country on earth. And yet we've got people who are so steadfast on destroying the basic social fabric of this country simply to push some sort of political agenda that doesn't really benefit anybody in the end. And it's mind-blowing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. They know not what they do is a good phrase used for them.
Yes,
but,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. All right, John, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be on with you. Come back anytime.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Dr. John Fuller, and thank you to Sarah P. for her song. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye.
To the